The first time I played DONTNOD Entertainment's Tell Me Why, I thought of Audre Lorde. For anyone who knows me, that probably comes as no surprise. In an essay entitled Eye to Eye, Black Women, Hatred and Anger, Lorde asks, "Why does my anger unleash itself most tellingly against another black woman at the least excuse? Why do I judge her in a more critical light than any other, becoming enraged when she does not measure up?" Lorde knows that other black women are not the root cause nor the source of that pool of anger, and concludes that behind the object of her attack is the face of her own self, unaccepted. Of course, the female protagonist in Tell Me Why, Alyson is a white woman, and her story isn't directly comparable to the lived experiences of black women. But from the very first episode of Tell Me Why, there was something striking about how angry she was at her mother, the woman who shared her face. Hi, I'm Sara, pronouns she, they, and welcome to Game Assist. Before we dive in, if you aren't a patron already and you'd like to help us continue to do what we do, please consider pledging your support at patreon.com/gameassistyt, and remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons. This video will, of course, contain spoilers for all 3 episodes of Tell Me Why. It will also include discussions and mentions of the following, which may be triggering: suicide, death, misogyny, mental illness, ableism and disableism, conversion therapy, sexual assault, and child services. In this video, I'll be discussing mental illness, a term which encompasses a range of mental impairments which may or may not have effects on individuals' abilities. Here, I will be discussing how the concept of madness uses characteristics of mental impairments and disabilities to socially malign women, rendering them as socially dead, rather than characters' actual experiences of their impairments or abilities. A key reason for the construction of disabled people as socially dead is their dependence on communities and institutions for care, as long as there is no cure for their impairment. As I'll discuss, this acts in particular ways to enact violence on women who don't fit into cis-heteropatriarchal norms. If you're interested in hearing us discuss mental illness and disability politics in more depth, do check out our video essays on disability in Life is Strange and in Project Diva Future Tone. In her 2007 book, Sad, Mad and Bad, Lisa Appignanesi provides a history of women and the mind doctors from 1800 onwards. Her overall argument, as laid out in the book's introduction, is that disease, as much as gender and biology, are hardly fixed universals, free of their times or our ways of seeing. As historians of medicine have increasingly argued, illness is the product of a subtle interplay between cultural perspectives and what is also a shifting biological reality. Essentially, madness is socially constructed. Appignanesi emphasizes that this does not make the torment, the anguish of a mind gone awry, any the less real. But what it does mean is that structures of power and oppression shape our understanding of what madness, insanity, mental illness, psychological issues, whatever you want to call it, is. While the mental distress that we feel is real, madness is socially constructed in order to maintain and reinforce structures of power and oppression in our society. Throughout history, diagnoses have revolved around what is and isn't socially and politically acceptable. Women are disproportionately and uniquely affected because patriarchal society has imposed constructions of what womanhood is and how women should behave. As Appignanesi says, What became clear in that major study, Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, was that a particular period's definitions of appropriate femininity or masculinity were closely linked to definitions of madness. Not conforming to a norm risks the label of deviance or madness and is sometimes attended by confinement. Openly sexual, queer, revolutionary, or angry women have been labeled as mad so that violence towards them can be justified. This violence has taken the form of physical violence in interpersonal relationships and through institutional structures like asylums, and psychological violence through systemic gaslighting, undermining a woman's autonomy and sense of self, and labeling her as mad. After all, such women have threatened the patriarchy, challenging the structures that oppress them. For women, madness has been constructed as their biological destiny. This relies on a cis-normative model of womanhood, of course, and it's interesting to think about how what I'm about to discuss affects non-binary people and trans men with the same reproductive system. In any case, historically, women's madness has been linked to their reproductive biology. The notorious diagnosis of hysteria, which was so popular in the 19th century, was coined from the Greek hystera, meaning womb, and was thought to be caused by problems with the uterus. The word lunacy may also be etymologically linked to the lunar menstrual cycle. In modern times, the physically coercive tactics of asylums have declined, or are at least less openly acceptable. It's important to say, though, that such practices have not been eradicated and do continue to exist in various forms today, including the practice of sectioning here in the UK. Sectioning is the legal detaining of someone based on concern for their mental health. So doctors, friends, or family can have you detained and take your autonomy away on the basis that you are crazy and dangerous, exactly like the asylum system. The way in which the construction of madness reinforces power structures in our society these days is primarily through medicalization and pathologization. Merriam-Webster defines pathologizing as to view or characterize as medically or psychologically abnormal. According to Appignanesi, the medical imperializing of all parts of our mental, emotional, and psychic lives, the pills that promise to make us better than well, may now, it seems, have overreached. To assume that sadness, even in its malignant form, is caused by a chemical imbalance may not be an altogether useful hypothesis or a particularly true one. Where we have what may arguably be more sophisticated, certainly more ordered diagnoses, disorders proliferate and also grow in complexity. Therapeutic ideals have so penetrated our Western world that there is sometimes a sense that the psi professions can fix everything. In our world, mental illness is medicalized and pathologized. It's understood as abnormal brain chemistry. So, at its core, it's still a question of what is and isn't normal. As Michel Foucault has pointed out, with moral management, the manacles, chains, handcuffs, strong chairs, and scold's bridles, the whole apparatus of physical coercion, gradually went to be replaced by the moral tools of talk, observation, and judgment. The control of the mad moves inwards and works through regimentation and an instilling of discipline. This isn't to say that understanding how our brain chemistry and our biology in general affects our mental health isn't useful, but its construction as the only explanation, the singular reason for all mental distress, is dangerous. Not only is the impulse to try to empirically explain and categorize human behavior reductive, it refuses to engage with social and political causes. No matter how good the therapist or how effective the drugs, in a world that enacts systemic violence, there is no medical cure for mental illness. To take an example, As we discussed in our video on capitalism, alienation, and disability in Project Diva Future Tone, the structure of power that is capitalism causes mental distress for various reasons, including its cultural emphasis on measuring individual worth on productivity and its material effects in preventing working-class people from accessing resources that could help them survive in a capitalist economy. The role of Big Pharma and privatized healthcare in the US provides clear political motives for constructing mental illness as a problem of brain chemistry which can be fixed or cured by medication and a doctor. Even in the UK though, as Appignanesi argues, though healthcare is technically free, the government pushes cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, as a cure-all in order to save money. Of course, there are many people out there that CBT isn't suited for, who can't afford to access private healthcare, though it often provides more appropriate treatment beyond the National Health Service's limited scope.
Yeah, I've looked into therapists a few times, but they're all so far away and so expensive.
As Appignanesi puts it, there are many aspects of our lives which have ended up with the terrain of the mind doctors when they might more aptly belong in a social or political sphere, either of action or interpretation. Now onto questions of madness and justice. In various Let's Play episodes here at Game Assist, we've discussed transformative justice and prison abolition. In the West, we are taught to normalize a carceral justice system, a system which views punishment in the form of incarceration or imprisonment as a form of justice. This system perpetuates a dichotomy of people as good or evil, innocent or guilty. Human beings are of course a lot more complex than any binary, but because the violence of the prison system is so great, carceral justice emphasizes the importance of empirically proving someone's guilt in order to create a justification for punishing them. For example, it should be proven that X person sexually assaulted Y person, because otherwise it would be unjust to send them to prison. We never stop to wonder if it is indeed just to imprison anyone at all. Outside of carceral justice, we might be far more inclined to simply believe people when they tell us they've experienced violence, because there would be no danger of perpetuating further violence by doing so. Accountability and punishment are not the same. Reoffense statistics everywhere, not to mention racialized statistics about who forms prison populations, make it clear enough that such a system only perpetuates further violence and doesn't help anyone. Carceral justice also relies on a separation between mad and bad, as Lisa Appignanesi outlines in her book. This separation is predicated on the idea that one who is mad has no control or agency and cannot be held accountable for their actions. These people are not simply evil, they are mad. Bad in an animal, childlike, even pitiable way. Even so, to be locked away in a psychiatric facility is not always much different from being locked away in a prison. The motivation may be help rather than punishment, cure rather than accountability, but the result is similarly violent. Certainly, both prisons and psych institutions serve the same function, to remove undesirables from society. Appignanesi herself consistently draws parallels between asylums and prisons, even observing that policymakers might find it worth noting that on the whole, when asylum populations go up, prison populations go down, and vice versa. There is even an allusion to this issue of the interchangeability of prisons and psychiatric institutions in the game, when Alyson and Tyler find paperwork on Officer Greg's desk claiming that patients are being moved from a psych ward to a prison.
I can't believe they're still sending psychiatric patients to prison.
Yeah, I heard about that. It's so messed up.
Finally, I want to discuss the fact that, historically, reading and writing have often been connected to madness in women. Women have suffered where they have not been able to access means of expression, whether art, writing, talk therapy, or just talking openly in general. Self-expression, telling your own story, of course has implications on personal as well as political autonomy. Sandra M. Gilbert and Susan Gubar, in their 1979 study, The Madwoman in the Attic, The Woman Writer and the 19th-Century Literary Imagination, argue that throughout the 19th century, women artists were literally and figuratively confined, in houses, in their social roles, in literary texts written by men, in asylums, and often portrayed images of confinement and isolation in their art. Gilbert and Gubar argue that patriarchal literary culture has created images of women as either angel or monster, and women writers themselves have interacted with this in complex ways, as, for the female artist, the essential process of self-definition is complicated by all those patriarchal definitions that intervene between herself and herself. A woman writer must examine, assimilate, and transcend the extreme images of angel and monster which male authors have generated for her. Often, in texts by women writers, the angel and the monster represent aspects of herself. The angel represents the patriarchal ideal of womanhood, but is silent and dead, while the monster represents assertiveness, aggressiveness, all characteristics of a male life of significant action, which are monstrous in women precisely because unfeminine, and must be silenced or killed. The woman writer herself is seen as monstrous as well, for when such creative energy appears in a woman, it may be anomalous, freakish, because as a male characteristic, it is essentially unfeminine. Monsters incarnate male dread of women, and specifically male discord of female creativity, and have thus drastically affected the self-image of women writers. But within the angel lurks the monster, the woman's desire to be selfish, to be autonomous. Therefore, all women are inescapably monstrous. Through metaphorical representations of doubles, women writers navigate the internalized images of woman as angel, passive, perfect, silent, dead, and woman as monster, assertive, aggressive, autonomous, powerful, within herself. Gilbert and Gubar's study uses Charlotte Bronte as a central figure, arguing that in her famous novel Jane Eyre, Bertha Rochester, the Madwoman in the Attic for whom the study and this video essay is named, serves as the monster double which must die. She is the angry, rebellious self which Jane must suppress in order to marry Rochester and to continue to exist in a patriarchal world. Another example used is the story of Snow White as it appears in Grimm's fairy tales. Gilbert and Gubar argue, the Queen and Snow White are in some sense one. While the Queen struggles to free herself from the passive Snow White in herself, Snow White must struggle to repress the assertive Queen in herself. All of this is connected to illness, particularly mental illness. Women must kill themselves, the monstrous part of themselves that strives for self-definition, in order to become the angel. And in practice, this has often manifested in women making themselves physically and psychologically ill, repressing a part of themselves. Gilbert and Gubar argue that representations of women as physically and mentally ill in art are in this way often connected to questions of women's oppression. In this essay, I will explore how, in Tell Me Why, Alyson Ronan's mental distress manifests through metaphorical representations of the mother she killed as her own double. As Alyson and her brother Tyler grapple with the memories of their mother, the question emerges: was crazy Mary Ann Ronan mad or simply bad? And how do Alyson's decisions about what to believe of her mother affect what she believes of herself? Mary Ann Ronan is constructed as a madwoman by the community of Delos Crossing. She is referred to as Crazy Mary Ann Ronan, and by various other descriptors including words like troubled and unhinged. Descriptors of her madness are consistently vague, refusing to pin down any particular diagnosis. Even when the twins find medication by her bed, the player isn't able to read the bottle. What's important here isn't the specific nature of her psychological problems, but the way in which she has been constructed as a madwoman by the community, and the manner in which this construction inflects the twins' own memories of her. In addition to her madwoman status, Mary Ann is othered by the community in various other ways. Perhaps the most obvious is her geographical isolation from Delos Crossing, locating her on the margin, outside of the community. Another factor is her political stance. It is hinted that she may have had similar radical political convictions to her son, who believes,
Too bad the law isn't really just.
in the loft in episode 3, the twins find an image of their mother by a sign reading environment over economy, implying an anti-capitalist stance, and Alyson claims in episode 2,
Yep, totally Mary Ann.
Why a princess, though? Why not a queen?
She hated authority.
she even lived in a commune when she first ran away from her parents.
Salmonberry Park. Huh. Is that some kind of commune?
Looks like it.
The only other woman in the game who seems to have something of a mad woman's reputation is so-called Crazy D, a queer black woman who isn't out to her colleagues and gained the title by burning her ex's car. Her status as a police officer certainly complicates things, but either way, the parallel solidifies the place of women who do not conform to a cis-heteropatriarchal ideal of what a woman should be, as othered, labelled as mad by the people of Delos Crossing. We are told that Mary Ann snapped not long before her death, and as the story unravels, we discover that this is related to a few very important factors, namely her financial situation. She has become reliant on Tessa Vecchi, her best friend, for food, money, and work. When Tessa discovers that her own husband, Tom Vecchi, is the father of Mary Ann's children, their relationship collapses. In a letter, depending on the choices you make in-game, Tessa may confess to the twins that, perhaps because I have never found the strength to confront my husband, I have never been able to forgive Mary Ann for her betrayal. I truly did love you both like my own children, and I always tried to forgive your mother for her unapologetic lifestyle. But when I discovered that you were the fruit of her affair with my Thomas, I wanted her to suffer like I was suffering, and I brought down on your house the wrath I never dared allow to unfold in mine. It is difficult to know what exactly Tessa is referring to, because it isn't clear when she discovered that her husband had cheated on her. Presumably, when she describes bringing wrath down on the Ronan house, she is referring to the fact that she called child services to report Mary Ann as an unfit mother. Particularly significant here is the fact that it is because she never found the strength to confront her husband that she has never been able to forgive Mary Ann. That is to say, she has displaced her anger as a woman betrayed by her husband onto another woman, rather than confront the man himself. Tessa's telling description of Mary Ann's unapologetic lifestyle, compared with her own conservatism, as demonstrated most prominently by her attempt to get Mary Ann to send Tyler to conversion therapy, may motivate her unwillingness to stand up to the patriarch Tom Vecchi. In a sense, Tessa kills or silences the woman monster in herself by projecting it onto Mary Ann and triggering the chain of events that kills her by calling child services. Marianne is widely perceived as mad, but in this confession, Tessa perceives her as bad and acts accordingly to punish her. She acts to remove Marianne's children from her because she has failed as a woman, as she is an unmarried mother, and she has failed as a mother, as she is struggling to provide materially for her children. As I mentioned earlier, because Marianne depends on her community to provide for her, and because she can't be fixed or cured, though ironically she loved to fix broken things, she is constructed as socially dead, and indeed her community's abandonment of her leads to her literal death. Ultimately, while Marianne's clear emotional dependence on her children in her isolation is unhealthy and has clearly affected them, the community of Deller's Crossing gives her little choice. It's highly likely that the reason for the twins remembering her as a failed mother themselves, one who would kill her son for being trans, is that they have internalized the community's construction of her as teetering on the borderline of mad and bad. Of course, this is soon complicated when the twins discover the book Raising Your Transgender Child in their mother's bedroom, shattering their conviction in the belief that she was a mad, bad, failed woman after all. Turning to Marianne's children now, it's clear that both Alyson and Tyler have internalized gender roles. Tyler internalizes masculinity as the active, assertive duty to protect his sister, which he demonstrates in his willingness to take the blame for his mother's death. As children, Tyler is a troublemaker. He speaks his mind, expresses himself openly, especially his anger and his frustration, while Alyson is the quiet little mouse.
This is the millionth time I've gotten in trouble because of you. You and your big mouth.
Hey, you were thinking the same thing, you just weren't brave enough to tell her.
What good would it do? It's not like she ever listens to us anyway.
Well, I'd rather scream it right in her stupid face than be a quiet little mouse.
This extends into adulthood, where we see Tyler protecting his sister still, often by physically standing between her and others. He also makes gendered assumptions about her at times.
Oh my god, that's the cutest.
It's cute, but don't tell me you've got baby fever.
Ew, no. Why do men always jump to that?
Tyler's masculinity absolutely isn't toxic, and he is clearly aware of and trying to reject toxic masculinity, but he has internalized a certain masculine role nonetheless. Alyson, it becomes apparent, also carries her gendered role into adulthood, still the quiet little mouse, or in Gilbert and Gubar's terms, the angel woman. This isn't to say that she never stands up for herself or speaks her mind, but it is to say that she has internalized the idea that femininity means emotional repression and self-sacrifice.
I really hope your brother appreciates your sacrifices.
He will. I mean, he does.
Significantly, she also remembers her mother in this way, as someone who, as I mentioned earlier, liked to fix broken things.
String, glue, duct tape. The holy trinity of house repair.
Marianne loved having something to fix.
There is a clear parallel between her and her mother in this regard, which emerges in episode 3, when she looks at a photo of Marianne and thinks,
You should have taken care of yourself first, Marianne. We deserved that.
And later in the episode, Michael tells her,
Look, I know you hate letting people down, but you gotta put your own oxygen mask on first.
In the same episode, Officer Greggs describes the angel woman he believes Alyson to be, and laments that, supposedly, Tyler's assertive and anti-authoritarian influence has caused her to behave out of character. When he says,
You're honest, stable, you're not a troublemaker. Tyler, I mean, if he goes down, don't let him take you with him.
This seems to trigger in her a panic attack. Honest jars with her lies about her mother's death, and stable jars with how unstable she feels. The Alyson that Delos Crossing knows is the one she presents to them, not who she really is, or feels herself to be. Indeed, masking one's mental impairments or disabilities is common for reasons such as fear of personal rejection, avoiding discrimination or exclusion, or the need to access work, support, or services. Emotional repression, repression of the truth, and self-sacrifice, all attributes of the angel woman, are deeply connected to the mental distress that Alyson feels. In order to appear a certain way, to exist in the world, she suppresses the angry, messy parts of herself and the truth about her actions, the monster woman in her. Rather than center her own emotional well-being, she prioritizes that of others. As Gilbert and Gubar put it, if the angel woman in some curious way simultaneously inhabits both this world and the next, then there is a sense in which, besides ministering to the dying, she is herself already dead. In the metaphysical emptiness, their purity signifies they are, of course, selfless, with all the moral and psychological implications that word suggests. As the game progresses, it becomes apparent that this monster woman that Alyson suppresses might be the very same Madwoman that she thought her mother was. In a nightmare at the beginning of episode 3, Alyson sees a shadowy figure that looks like her mother on the night she died, dropping pieces of paper that read, "You killed me, you will end up like me, and you killed your mother." Confirming Alyson's semi-conscious fears that she will end up like her mother, it's unclear how, but presumably alone, mad, destitute, dead. This nightmare also creates striking visual parallels between mother and daughter, so that they are one and the same, mirrors of one another. The separation of the statements, "you killed your mother" and "you killed me," imply that Alyson didn't just kill her mother that night. And indeed, this shadowy figure turns out to be her own self, not Marianne. It becomes clear that she associates the monster woman within herself with the image of her mother. But this woman didn't die with Marianne. On the contrary, it seems that killing Marianne is what awakened the monster, the mad woman in Alyson. Taking someone's life is, after all, a monstrously active, aggressive act, entirely inappropriate for a woman, let alone a young girl. Never mind that her intention was to defend herself and her brother. It's more appropriate for the brother to defend the sister, for the son to murder the mother. So this is the story they tell. When she wakes up from her dream, the image of Alyson submerging her face in water even recalls her mother's death by drowning. But why would she think that her and her mother are the same, or that they will share the same fate? Several parallels are made between Alyson and Marianne throughout the game. The most prominent is perhaps the fact that they are both creative, artistic women who write. The Book of Goblins, which serves as the key to Marianne's secrets, was written by them both, and in your collectibles menu, it is young Alyson who narrates each character.
The secret keeper is a traveling woman who buys and sells secrets. She stores all these secrets in the clouds because nobody ever looks up when they're searching for hidden things.
Importantly, the creative aspirations of both these women are undermined by men who are or fulfill roles adjacent to husband and father. If you complete the extra puzzles in the loft in episode 3, the twins discover that Marianne and Tessa were going to start a business together, Pelican Crossing, a specialty gift boutique which would sell handcrafted accessories, souvenirs, and apparel, and art by local artists, presumably including Marianne herself. Thanks to Tom's cheating on Tessa with Marianne, but perhaps more importantly his refusal to take responsibility and be honest with Tessa about it, this business never becomes a reality. Marianne isn't innocent in all of this, of course, but recalling Tessa's letter, it's Tom's dishonesty which is the major factor. Marianne becomes reliant on working at Tom's store, and on other financial and material support from his wife. She is not able to be creatively or financially independent. While her mother nurtured her daughter's creative side while she was alive, Alyson's artistic aspirations are also undermined, this time by Eddie, her adoptive father. He too lies to her, telling her that she was rejected by a drama school she applied to and declining the offer on her behalf, thereby undermining her agency and autonomy. Eddie also keeps the secret that Tessa reported Marianne to child services and that he facilitated this, therefore playing a direct role in the events that led to Marianne's death. Alyson lies to Eddie about her mother's death too, of course, but it isn't a lie to undermine him, and one can hardly hold it against her in the circumstances. Eddie is the one who holds power in their relationship, just as Tom held power over Marianne. It isn't a coincidence either that Alyson works at the Vecchi's store. The Vecchi's store further embodies patriarchal power because its slogan is Veni Vidi Vecchi, taken from the Latin Veni Vidi Vici, which, as Tyler mentions, is taken from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar.
Veni Vidi. Oh, I just got it. That's kind of funny, actually.
It's been up here for ages.
Excuse me for not being hip to Julius Caesar at 11.
The phrase itself means I came, I saw, I conquered, and it exists in the context of a play about masculine imperialist power, violence, and betrayal, about a man widely considered the father or patriarch of imperial Rome. A clever bit of foreshadowing there from DONTNOD, which I honestly completely missed the first time. While there might not be enough space in this essay for a deep dive, it's certainly significant that this game features indigenous characters who speak about ongoing imperialist violence in this context. See our video on disability, gender and agency in Life is Strange for more on how patriarchy and Western colonialism are the same structure of power, and how this is represented in another game by DONTNOD Entertainment. If you want to hear more from me on this topic in the future, let us know in the comments. Gilbert and Gubar state that, from Eve, Minerva, Sophia, Galatea onward, patriarchal mythology defines women as created by, from, and for men, the children of male brains, ribs, and ingenuity. The poet, like God the Father, is a paternalistic ruler of the fictive world he has created. Indeed, for the majority of the game, arguably even the whole thing, Marianne's story is not her own. As we've discussed, the community of Delos Crossing constructs a narrative of her life and who she was as a person, and the central figure responsible for this is Tom Vecchi, Alyson's father. It's significant that Tom is a politician and running for mayor. His motives can't be trusted. Everything he says seems to be tailored in order to manipulate. He enacts power over the Ronins not through overt violence, but through patriarchal storytelling. Accessing the loft in episode 3 is the closest the twins ever get to hearing Marianne's story in her words, and even then, it's mediated through metaphors, symbols, and puzzles. In her letter to the twins, Marianne says, "We write stories to understand and be understood." This "we" may apply to herself and her daughter, but it certainly doesn't apply to the patriarchal poets who write in order to manipulate and enact power. With all of this in mind, the way the game's final decision is framed creates a double bind, and it is Alyson of the two twins who makes this choice. Indeed, throughout the game, it is mostly Alyson who chooses which memory to believe, and because of its effect on the bond between the twins, you, as the player, can choose to approach these choices in a self-sacrificing manner. The game frames its final decision between believing Tom's version and sticking to your memory, but also as a decision between believing that Marianne did not threaten Tyler or Marianne threatened Tyler. There is no way to know the truth, Tyler insists, so Alyson must choose what to believe. But placing faith in her own memory also places it in a narrative of Marianne as Madwoman, as failed mother. Meanwhile, believing Alyson's manipulative, power-hungry father's version of events is also to believe that Marianne was more sad than mad, that she was a loving mother who was far from perfect but tried her best, a woman who was failed, materially and emotionally, by the world she lived in. It would appear that the majority of players, a significant 64%, have chosen to believe that Marianne did not threaten Tyler. And honestly, this just makes logical sense based on the events of the game. The princess's loss, the story that Marianne told the twins on the night she died, is the story that they find in her loft, where she wanted them to find it, alongside a letter addressed directly to them. She couldn't have wanted to kill them if she wanted them to find everything she left there, to tell them her story in her own words, before she took her own life. Unless, of course, it's easier to believe.
So that's it then. She was crazy. Nothing else to say.
To me, it feels that perhaps sticking to your memory is less about Alyson believing in herself, and more about reinforcing the patriarchal narrative that she has internalized. In this reading, ironically, believing the patriarch actually serves to undermine his narrative. We've discussed both Marianne and Alyson as madwomen, but we haven't yet addressed a major player in the story, the Mad Hunter. Who is he, exactly? As Tyler observes in episode 2, not every character in the Book of Goblins is necessarily based on a real person, the way that the pious pelican, the stalwart moose, and the old bear are based on Tessa, Eddie, and Sam, respectively. In episode 1, it seems that Tyler may have hallucinated the Mad Hunter, but later it's revealed that who he really saw was Tom. The Mad Hunter isn't simply a representation of Tom, but he is linked to Tom, and I'll come back to that. The character of the Mad Hunter is used almost interchangeably with a metaphorical darkness, and his appearance is that of a great shadow which bears a terrifying grin. In the Book of Goblins, Marianne describes her flight from the Mad Hunter, not her mother, the Gold Lady. So running away from home is about something deeper than just her controlling parents. In the book, the goblins defeat the Mad Hunter. Based on this, the character and related darkness may be symbolic of madness or mental distress, showing that being the twins' mother was essential to Marianne's health. But this alone isn't quite right either. In the episode recaps at the beginning of chapter 2 and 3, we are told that
the crafty goblins did everything together, until one day, when darkness overwhelmed the big wooden house in which they lived.
Blamed for the darkness, Brother Goblin was forced to leave the forest, while his sister had to stay behind.
Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, crafty goblins faced the truth about the darkness in the big wooden house.
It had come for the wise princess, driving her mad and causing her to attack them.
When they started asking questions about the princess in the darkness, the goblins realized that no one else in the forest wanted to know the truth.
So they dug and searched and asked hurtful questions, learning more about the wise princess than they had ever hoped to.
But the search took its toll. The darkness was proving too much for Sister Goblin.
the darkness had driven the wise princess, their mother, mad, and it was proving too much for the sister goblin. The operative phrase being driven, this implies that the darkness is not the madness itself, but whatever caused the madness. Indeed, this character is called the Mad Hunter, not simply the Mad. The name may not mean a hunter who is mad, but rather a hunter of the mad.
The Mad Hunter is a cruel and ruthless creature. Once he starts hunting someone, he never stops. He'll chase his prey to the ends of the earth if he needs to. No one can escape his piercing eye.
It's also interesting to note that mad has a double meaning of angry as well as crazy, and angry women, as we've discussed, are a threat to the patriarchy. So what is it that both drives these women mad and also hunts them mad? The darkness that the wise princess ran from before she arrived in Delos Crossing is connected to her life at home. Her family, particularly her mother, were in the business of dictating her life to her, of making decisions for her, and taking her autonomy away. Despite the prominence of her mother rather than her father in the Book of Goblins as the Gold Lady, Marianne's mother represents the patriarchal order that she has internalized, which takes away women's agency, prohibits them from self-expression and creativity, confines them, and doesn't allow them to tell their own stories.
The Gold Lady is the wise princess's cruel mother, who sent the Mad Hunter to drive the girl back to the palace.
That she is the Gold Lady indicates that she is a representative of capitalism as well as patriarchy. These are both part of the same system of power, as we discuss further in our video on bisexuality as a game mechanic. Capitalism and patriarchy are also what Tom Vecchi, whom young Tyler envisions as the Mad Hunter, represents. It appears, then, that it is these structures of power and oppression, the same structures which, as I discussed earlier, constructs madness in order to oppress women and makes women mad with the violence it enacts, that the Mad Hunter represents. On the official Tell Me Why website, a page entitled Exploring the Endings of Tell Me Why states, Alyson will stay at 12 Cannery Road to process and heal from her grief in the place she knows best. This doesn't mean an epilogue with Alyson is a bad ending, though. Depending on other parts of the epilogue, such as the twins' relationship and the state of their bond, Alyson may have all the tools she needs to live a happy life. Elise Galmard, lead narrative designer at DONTNOD, is also quoted on this page, saying, I think it's important to see the Ronin house as a cocoon for Alyson, just like Fireweed was for Tyler. Alyson isn't living in the past. Alyson is simply coming to terms with her grief and anxiety in the way that works best for her. In fact, if you look closely at much of Alyson's art in the epilogue, you may find paintings and collage artwork that make use of old pictures and objects from the twins' childhood. This is very much the Alyson way of healing and trying to make sense of it all, by channeling all of that energy into creation and art. Life is not over, and it is most definitely not put on hold for Alyson. Perhaps it's true that Alyson is trying to focus on healing on her own while staying in her mother's house, but the implications of her final decision, of what she chooses to believe about her mother, have implications on what she believes of herself. The ending that Alyson herself writes in her own words is not the most hopeful one. In the final chapter of the Book of Goblins, she writes,
Once upon a time, in an ancient and deep forest, there lived a solitary goblin in a big wooden house. That goblin had not always been so solitary. She had a twin, and when they were younger, they were inseparable. Together, they rescued princesses and outsmarted ice trolls, and even trapped a mad hunter. But as she grew older, the goblin sister decided that she'd had enough of adventures. So while her brother went out to explore the world, she stayed behind as guardian of the big wooden house. For it is not on all of us to adventure. some must stay behind to tell the story and to hold shelter for those who may come back and those who never left.
In this epilogue, Alyson has moved into her mother's old room, and her isolation is reminiscent of Marianne's. She describes having to drive 20 extra miles to get her groceries in order to avoid Vecchi's, and seems disconnected from the community of Delos Crossing. Her best friend Michael has moved to Juneau without her, and if her bond with Tyler remains, then she isn't entirely alone, connecting with her brother whenever she feels the need. But if their bond is broken, then she is utterly alone. This ending is possible only if the player, as Alyson, continues to hide the truth from Eddie about who really killed Marianne, or if you choose to stick to her initial memory of Marianne, the Madwoman, threatening to kill her son. Maybe the space can be good for her, but it's difficult to see this epilogue as hopeful when Alyson seems so defeated, so resigned to a continued life of passivity, emotional repression, and isolation. It is her mother's destiny, but perhaps not what her mother would have wanted for her.
I'm so sick of this. I'm so tired of trying to unravel all of Marianne's fucking secrets. I don't understand her. I want to hate her so much. But I don't even know who she was.
This essay certainly has various political conclusions. For one, if we lived in a world where Marianne received full financial welfare support, covering food and necessities for herself and her family, covering mental health support for herself personally, covering transition-related healthcare for Tyler, what befell the Ronan family never would have happened. If we didn't have a carceral justice system, Tyler never would have been imprisoned for an act of self-defense, and there never would have been any need to keep the truth in order to protect Alyson, because there would be no risk of either of them coming to harm. Instead, they could have healed and grown together. If she lived in a community that didn't stigmatize women's choices or people's impairments, that didn't use patriarchal storytelling to perpetuate violence, then Alyson, too, never would have thought of her mother, and never would have thought of herself, as mad, as bad, or as a burden. Capitalism and patriarchy drive us mad, then use our madness against us, to oppress us. While in therapy myself, though, working on this essay has been a personally deeply important experience for me, and I want to end this essay on a personal note. I'm going to return to the words of Audre Lorde once more, this time from her piece entitled Man-Child, a Black Lesbian Feminist Response. Reflecting on her relationship with her son, Lorde's simple parenting philosophy is, the truest direction comes from inside. I give the most strength to my children by being willing to look within myself and by being honest with them about what I find there, without expecting a response beyond their years. In this way, they begin to learn to look beyond their own fears. As Alyson Ronan contends with her memories of her mother and with the fallibility of memories, her anger and her pain do not vanish as if by magic. Rather, she is struck most of all by the painful fact that she never knew her mother and that she wanted to. She simply wanted her mother to share her fears, her anger, and her sorrows, not as the wise princess, but as Marianne Ronan.
Alyson.
Is that her?
What the hell was going on with you? What? Broke?
Why
didn't you say anything? We were your goblins. You didn't have to do it all alone.
Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, please do give it a like and be sure to comment. As always, a huge thank you to our patrons who make videos like this possible. We genuinely couldn't do this without you. Special thanks to our ambassador patrons, Beatrix Livesey Stevens and Ditzy Doggy. If you aren't a patron already, please consider supporting us over at patreon.com/GameAssistYT. Catch us over on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for further discussions and conversations. And as always, thank you for watching. Take care.